Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us via satellite. So welcome. We appreciate you engaging with us and learning more about the June 2024 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip. We have folks who are on the Zoom. We have folks here in person. For the people who are on the Zoom this evening, the only Zoom that can accommodate more than 100 people the district owns, and I have very little to do with kind of behind the curtain. So it appears for everyone who are on the Zoom that there isn't much or really a way to interact with us. So something tells me myself in 30 minutes is going to regret saying this, but if you have any questions and you're on the Zoom, you can email me. I'm actually going to turn the presentation over and I'll just kind of take emails as they come in. And then in about 30 minutes from now, when we allow all of you who are in person to raise your hand and ask a question, I will filter through the emails around the 6:30 hour and we'll just take some questions from the folks who are at home as well. I don't think I need to say this, but often it's your neighbor's question that is the question that you never thought about asking. So even if we're good in person, I really would recommend that you stay and listen to the questions that your neighbors and others in the 8th grade might have, again, via email. I do apologize about that. We're going to get started. We figured the best way to really start is to acknowledge what was shared in my email, but I want to make sure we're upfront and honest about this. If you didn't read my email that I sent out last week, the communities around us are canceling this trip with not much of a notice to the parent community, most importantly to the children. And the reason why a lot of the communities around us are canceling it, a couple of years ago, you might have thought, oh, COVID must be raging again. The worrisome of traveling and whether or not, your child gets COVID and all of that. It actually has very little to do with that. It has everything to do with inflation and where the trip cost has really arrived to. It's extraordinarily worrisome. I stand in front of you as a family of 2 children and a wife, but we are a single income family. And when I look at this trip cost, which is $1,400 to send one 8th grader, it very much puts me in a place of great dilemma and concern that, would my family or my 2 daughters be able to afford this trip? And then if I rewind the clock back about 30 years, and I am 8th grade Justin, who was raised by a grandmother and by a mother who was working 2 jobs, same thing. So 13-year-old Justin worries about this, and a much older Justin worries about this as well in terms of equity and access for all of our families to afford and to be able to go on this trip. Instead of doing what other districts are doing, which I believe is Westford, Wayland, Northborough, Southborough, I heard, again, all just kind of canceled the trip without much notice. We are doubling down, tripling down on our fundraising efforts. We're not going to get into a lot of this is what we're thinking about doing, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. That's when we meet with the 8th graders sometime in early January. Because not only do we see fundraising as an opportunity to get this trip price point down for all of our families, but we also see a great way to engage our 8th graders in a sense of responsibility, in a sense of ownership on their own trip. And then there's a great correlation to whenever you're paying for something yourself, you tend to actually put better care in the quality and your experience with it. And again, I go back to now, I guess, 20 or so old Justin, who was paying for college himself, surrounded what I felt with a lot of knuckleheads who were making all these decisions that were very much potentially compromising their ability to be out of college. I funded a lot of my college experience myself, and I felt like that gave me a renewed and better sense of responsibility and care in actually going. So sometime in January, we're going to reach back out to all of you. We may do a Zoom, 100% Zoom, where we share two types of fundraising efforts. One, we're going to ask every eighth grader to engage in a fundraiser that attaches directly to their trip, that gets their trip costs down, and it doesn't matter what the family believes is their comfort level in affording this trip. We really want to engage every eighth grader in working hard on getting their trip down. That's the first type of fundraiser. Then we're looking at about 3 community fundraisers that we're going to open up to all 3 grades, maybe even open up to our elementaries and to our high schools as well, that will go and feed into a very large scholarship fund that we can offer to our families who, again, need a partial, a half, or even a full scholarship. Last year's price point was about $1,200. So this year's price point goal is now $200 more. That being said, those $200 more dollars, they're actually funding a different type of trip that we're going to get into in just a couple minutes. That being said, last year we had approximately 27 families who needed some sort of financial assistance. And to my knowledge, every family that needed financial assistance, we met them at where they needed us to meet them. And the district and Capital Tours spent close to $30,000 making sure that every eighth grader had access to this trip last year. And last year we arrived to the same place that we were before COVID, of anywhere between 95 and 98% of the class going. And that's a common question that we have in an evening like this. I actually struggle a little bit with sharing that upfront and honest, or being upfront and honest about that, because what I'm not looking to do is provide pressure upon your family or your eighth grader that they have to attend. So as soon as I say that with some pride that our district helps out those families to make sure that every eighth grader who wants to go can in fact go, this trip is socially charged. And it's not for everyone. It's not for all eighth graders. It's not for all students. We strive to make sure that it can be, and you know, we do everything we can, but we also don't want to provide that pressure of we wouldn't be going if 95% of the grade is going. That being said, there's a lot of individual conversations we can have with your family that, you know, can, if you want, involve like our guidance counselors, our nurse, and as far as what we can do to accommodate to make this maybe a positive risk for your eighth grader, especially the introverted eighth grader, again, me, who was like, nope, can't do it, guess I can't afford it, so I'm out. And again, eighth grade Justin was just using that as kind of a shield, right? I'm saying right like you knew. And that was quite honest. Whereas, again, if you think your eighth grader could get that kind of swift kick in the rear end and say, nope, you're going, but then you need to circle around your eighth grader and connect with me on scholarship, know that your eighth grader will never know that we're having that conversation. And if your eighth grader raises some funds to get their trip down from say 1,400 to 1,100 or 1,000, and they think that you're paying that 1,000, that's fine. The best way to communicate at this age is to circle around them and to speak to your school. You know, some parents don't know how to ask that question whenever I connect with them as far as, you know, does your son know that we're talking? Does your daughter know we're talking? Sometimes the middle school parent will say, well, of course, I have such an open relationship. And sometimes it's good, but in other times, it's okay if they think they're taking the lead, especially at this age. A couple other things about the price before I turn it over and we go into our formal presentation. Our sister school, Carlisle Middle School, their price went up $200 as well, but I can't explain this, and the principal can't explain this as well. Their trip is exactly the same. Their trip is 3 days, 2 nights at a price point of $1,200. Ours went up from $1,200 to $1,400, but we've actually pushed our margins out so that we're traveling, if you've spoken to any ninth grade parent or guardian, we're traveling at a much more reasonable, safe time to travel. We are traveling and leaving that Monday, June 4th, around the late evening hour, getting to the hotel, checking in, and hopefully tucking right into bed. We'll say about that one. And we're not arriving here, true story, at Sanborn at 2 a.m. to jump on a 4:30 a.m. flight that early Tuesday morning. So we flexed that first margin out, and then coming back, if you've spoken to any ninth grade parent or guardian, there was a group that was stranded. If I search my text with the word stranded, I have about 12 parents who use that word. They were stranded at the Providence airport at like 2 a.m. in the morning. And because all 8th grade seems to travel at the same time, there was some overbooking done by the buses. And that group of 8th graders, probably about 38th graders, about 6 or 7 of us, were at the Providence airport from like 1:30 to about 3:30, got back here at about 5 a.m. So all of that is not happening this year. We've flexed out our margins. We were leaving the DC area that Friday, I think around late morning, early afternoon, and we should be pulling up, the buses should be pulling up sometime probably 6 or 7 o'clock at night at the latest. So there's a reason why our trip went up, and what districts can't explain that are surrounding us, the ones that are still committed to student travel, is why their trip went up so much, and they really haven't changed much. I guess the last thing I'll say too is when it comes to a price point, this district does have some recent history, as recent as 5 years ago, about busing down. And have we looked at busing as a ways to make this price point a little bit cheaper? Believe it or not, buses aren't that much cheaper. We know some districts that are going around the same length as us for around 1,100, and they're busing down. The bigger reason why we're not busing is because of the safety of the trip. I have gone on this trip for about 25 years. 50% of it I've bussed down, 50% I have flown down. And it's quite the paradox, but as adults, we get this. Flying is the safest mode of travel. And there are many times where buses have broken down, and the number of times that we have to stop at rest stops, like in the middle of the night. I always say New Jersey, and there's always someone who says, hey, I'm from New Jersey. But it always seems to be New Jersey that we're stopping at, this rest stop where there's all these truckers around us, and we're trying to make a pathway to this rest stop to go to the bathrooms. And believe me when I say that airport travel is the safest way to go. There is anxiety related to flying, of course, but that's something we want you to reach out to us sometime in early spring that we can support, especially for those 8th graders who are new to airline travel as well. I'm going to turn it over, but if there's any questions about price point, how to fill out financial aid, any of that, all 3 of us are available after this quick presentation. And again, I just want to, especially for those who joined us on Zoom, I do apologize. It looks like that the settings have it that there's no Q&A, there's no chat. So if you want to email me a question as it pops in your mind, please just email to me and I'll gather questions at about the 6:30 hour. It's 6:14 right now.
All right. Hi, my name's Kelly Messier. I am the librarian here at CMS, but I'm also one of the DC trip coordinators. This is Tara.
And I'm Tara Fernandez Avila, the Wyman Sefti as well. And I'm a secondary coordinator helping out. And yes, I'm a science teacher and science department chair as well.
So at my previous school that I worked at, I had been going on this trip before COVID. And I think I went on about like 6 or 7 trips as a chaperone, not leading the trip. Last year was my first time leading the trip, so that was very exciting. And Tara joined me as well, because we were like, oh, we should have 2 people doing this.
Right.
We both have lots of experience going on this trip chaperoning. It's amazing to see the kids out of the classroom on a field trip in Washington DC. There's just like so many benefits that I just remember the end of the year last year being such a great experience, and all the kids were so excited when they got home, and it was very cool to see back to normal again, I guess. So we're just gonna go over a couple of things. I'm talking to Zoom as well, hello. We're just gonna go over a couple of things about the trip itself, some of the changes that Justin was talking about, especially with the timing and all that. And I do need to correct myself because I told him June 4th just now, but it's June 3rd that we are heading down there later this year. So this is all our info. So I need to change that to June 3rd because it's June 3rd. Yeah, but we are going with Capital Tours. They were based in Haverhill, but I think they actually moved up to Hampstead, New Hampshire. Their office changed, but they didn't change. And Jeff Zinakis, I think is how you pronounce it, is our connection there. And he's the one we're in touch with on all the information about our trip.
Carlisle Middle School is the one who made a reference to Capital Tours. They've been traveling with Carlisle for a great number of years.
And, oh, yes, go ahead. Yes, that's right. That's right. Sorry, go ahead.
So this is just a screenshot of the website that I created for the Washington DC trip. It has a lot of great information on there. This was sent out via email from Justin, and it's also going to be put on our website hopefully tomorrow. But here you can find information on registration, all the things that we're going to go over tonight about registering your student, scholarship information, important dates for payments and things like that. And we will have another parent meeting, we will have a student meeting, and all that information can be found on this website. And again, that's available on our website and in the email from Justin.
So this is a breakdown of how the cost of the trip will look. As you heard, we do have our total of $1,417. But we do have this benefit, as you heard, about the 4 nights. And I think just getting us there, settling in, being able to just rest and be ready for the day ahead is going to be a really nice way to shift the trip, and a good benefit to that. It does include the airfare, it includes all hotel costs, all food costs, all buses in Washington DC, all tours. We have this great dinner dance, that's a fun highlight as well. The hotel night hallway security, which they are always there all night long while they're sleeping, and there to make sure everything's safe through the night. And the ratio, so we have coordinated that we have a 1-to-10 ratio of teachers and chaperones that are here with the students as well. So all of that is included. First deposit is by the end of this week, so just beware. It's only $50 to start, but that is coming right up.
And again, it's June 3rd, and I'm sorry. It doesn't say that on there. Okay, so this is the insurance portion of it. So I just spoke to Jeff about the difference between basic insurance versus cancel for any reason insurance. When you register your students, you will receive an email, which I'll show you because for whatever reason, sometimes it goes into people's spam email account. But I'm going to show you all about that later. But you'll receive an email back confirming your registration, and you'll also have the option, it is not required to have insurance. You'll have the option to purchase 2 levels of insurance. So basic insurance would be if your student were to get sick. And they are no longer able to go on the trip, you would get a 100% refund with basic insurance, which is at a price point of $60.
I think you need a doctor's note, which should be easy enough to get.
Right.
So that includes COVID is the basic insurance.
Mm-hmm. Cancel for any reason is as it's stated. They don't have to have a doctor's note. It doesn't have to be for a sickness. It can just be that they are no longer going on the trip. So there's some stipulations here, I think, but double check on on the information packet. It has all the fine print. But that is the major difference between basic and cancel for any reason. Basic is for if your child is not able to go because they are sick with a doctor's note, cancel for any reason is cancel for any reason. And you have to sign up for the insurance within 14 days of registration.
There's scholarships. So there, part of the website, there is a form available for scholarships. So this would be a great place to go if you would like to request any financial aid. And so just be aware that this exists if you follow the link through the email, or once it's up on the website, you'll be able to get this.
So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to say, kind of a life hack that I found. If you believe that your family might be in need of more than 50% of the trip's cost, allow us to register your 8th grader. That way, you will not be a part of any annoying reminders of payments due, your payment is past due. None of that will happen for the families and 8th graders that we register. Instead, we get those emails. And again, we pay the portion that we have pledged to your family that we're going to be paying. And then either you can pay Capital Tours or you can pay Concord Middle School. That's up to you. There is a great advantage to those families who are assisting in financial aid to allowing us to register you. There's also an advantage in the area of if you have any concern, and up until Capital Tours needs your child's information for the flights, it's also much easier to cancel your child. And I have to be honest, if you haven't taken out any insurance and it's us paying more than half of your trip's cost, then there's no concern about you getting back any money as well. Hope that was clear. If there are any questions in regards to that in terms of financial need or scholarship, again, when it's over 50% is really what I'm advising you do. I can register you within a minute. And even if for some reason you're not able to pay by this Friday, the $50, you know, we can float that, or it can be part of our 50% or more, if that is the scholarship request that you're making.
I did want to just also point out the date that this is coming up as well. So by Friday, the 16th, that means 2 weeks out, that you would want to have this request placed.
There's that June 4th date. It's just haunting me. Okay. So just like you were saying before, this slide's a little bit repetitive, but we do want you to know that we'll be in constant communication with your students during the trip. Last year we tested out apps where we could be in communication with them. Sometimes we switch that up. We also have done it so Mr. Cameron actually email or texts out to all the students. So there's constant communication, and we make sure that kids are constantly using the buddy system. No one's ever by themselves. They're in with their roommates and they're together at all times. We are taking coach buses to the airport, and we won't have an issue of like, there was this whole wristband issue last year that we won't have to worry about because of that extra day that we have flying down on that Monday. When we are in DC, we travel on coach buses as well. So students are with their roommates on their bus with a chaperone, and we are broken up into about 4 or 5 different buses. And we have guided tours throughout the city for the full time that we're there, which is amazing.
Just want to also reiterate that this is a very unique trip with so many great things that students can take away, but it is, you know, really worth considering too, you know, that it is going to be long days of travel. Obviously we have flying and being with people a lot of the time, keeping up with the schedule. So it is, you know, rather demanding on there, you know, just keeping up through the day and being in a social situation. We have so many things in place, like you heard about the communication, the leaders, the chaperone guides, the nurse. There are so many people there to support it, but we just also want to remind you that, you know, it is really worth considering. Is this the right kind of trip for your child?
Just adding to
Oh,
that a little
walking.
bit
The
that,
walking too.
yeah, the walking, but student responsibility too. We meet with the students ahead of time. We really talk to them about those things, constant communication. You're not going off anywhere by yourself. And I think like Justin was saying, if they start kind of owning their trip a little bit more, they always rise to that occasion. And all the trips I've been on have rarely ever had issues. So, they turn into little adults, so. Okay, so this is a proposed itinerary. There's June 3rd. All right, we're going June 3rd. Okay, so we will depart hopefully in the afternoon. And
We are departing.
yeah.
After school, that school day will be awkward. Let's pretend it doesn't exist. You can ask me about that maybe a month before.
But this is just so great because last year, like we said, we were waking up, getting to CMS at like 2, 3 a.m. So this is gonna be so much better. We're gonna have a flight down, check into our hotel, get them to bed, and then we're gonna wake up in the morning and be there and ready to tour, which is absolutely fabulous. So day 2, this could change, but mostly everything on the schedule that you see here, the National Museum of African American History, the National Air and Space Museum, Museum of Natural History, they're gonna see all these museums. What we do with this, we give them, different groups will go at different places at different times. It's all pre-ticketed and all that if it requires a ticket. And they'll have a certain amount of time to explore, meet your chaperone back at this point. Chaperones are walking around everywhere. It's basically all 8th grade groups at the time. So there's adults everywhere in the museums. So they do get their free time, but then we come back and check in together as a group. I think there is one museum we have to walk around together though.
American history.
Yeah. Dinner and lunches vary depending on the day. We usually have a couple of food court days where kids are given a certain amount of money. I believe it's $15 to pay for their meals, and they're allowed to pick what they would like to eat. I believe we would have maybe 2 sit-down dinners, one being like a Bertucci's, another being the dinner dance that they have, which I think is on the next slide. Yep, that day 3. In the past, we've done both the Cherry Blossom Cruise, which is a beautiful night on the water. But there's also the option to just have it at one of the hotels as well if there's it's just to be determined based on schedules of the companies. We have a nice day at Arlington National Cemetery. Working to get our school to do a public wreath laying at the Arlington National Cemetery, which would be amazing. There's that dinner at Bertucci's. And then the Friday is not too jam-packed, giving us enough time to get home at a decent hour Friday night, but still being able to see everything that we want to see. And I believe that's it. The hotel is at the bottom there, Sard. Is that what we stayed last year? I believe so, right?
I don't remember.
I remember Silver Spring, but
But maybe
regardless,
it is.
hotels are great.
Big Fleetwood Mac fan. I would have remembered that. Sorry, is that your last, your next slide?
There might be another one.
So why don't I actually just cue the people at home or at work, wherever you might be. This is a good time. We have about 5 minutes left in presenting to email me your question so that we have it in about 5 minutes. We're going to take questions from the people here in person first, but I'll be happy to read all the questions that are emailed me in the next 5 minutes and probably about 10 or 15 minutes from now.
So this is the Capital Tours website that you'll be directed to when you open any of these links that we shared with you. And it's a really simple registration form that you will fill out. So you're going to go here and you're going to click the registration button that it's pointing to. And then you're going to go ahead and fill in the student registration form. And again, there's no insurance option at this point. This is literally just to register your student. And then you'll actually be set up with an account through Capital Tours And you'll have a login, and you'll be able to see the payments that you've made, and be able to keep track of everything, which is really nice. It's a pretty user-friendly interface. And that is your step 2 in registering. And then step 3, this is what I was talking about before. Sometimes the email goes to people's spam folders. So if you feel like it's been a decent amount of time for it to travel through cyberspace, then check your spam, because sometimes it gets sent in that direction. And there should be a link or some more information about next steps and insurance. I think that is it. Yep.
All right, wonderful. So we will now take your questions. We have about 7 questions so far in the email world. So we'll give those folks who are on Zoom a little bit more time. The questions that are asked here in person, we'll restate them so that folks on Zoom can hear. We've got a question in the back. Yep, go ahead. Yeah, let's talk about all the different groups of kids. Because when it comes to the flying as well, with a class size of about 220, last year around 200 students traveled, and we had, our ratio is 1 to 10. So there's one of us, a CMS staff, and a nurse, administrator, to every 10 CMS students. The first group that your child will be put into is an airport group. Because we divide the group into about thirds. It's not as clean, and a lot of the 8th graders are pretty psyched to hear what I'm about to say. It's not as clean as the team they're on. Some airport groups might have to be 30, some might have to be 90. So that's the first group. And now here's where they will moan and groan at me. That's usually alphabetical. The airport, though, very different from the buses, right? Where they would be assigned a bus to travel down to DC, and they would be on that bus for 10 hours. The airport is, we get there, we check in, and there's about an hour-and-a-half flight down to DC. That's the first group. There isn't a lot of agency or voice in what 8th grade, the 8th grader, what airport group they want. Now, I think the question, which is about 8 of my 10 questions right now from parents, is that lovely, blissful world of choosing roommates. It's not fun. It's not fun for any of you. It's not fun for us. We do put out a Google form that allows our 8th graders to choose some students that they would feel most comfortable with. It pains us to do this, but we also end that form with, is there any other information that you want us to know? Sadly, and this is fine, that's the field that an 8th grader may share. I have concerns with this peer or that peer, and we make sure that that doesn't happen as well. Last year, it took us well over 40, 50 hours of man time to put together all the rooms. And I believe we had almost every 8th grader with at least one person that was their first or second choice in wanting to be in a room. And most rooms were put together where the 4, because there are 4 8th graders in a room, all 4 knew each other very well. There were very few rooms where these 2 were being introduced to those 2, which is a lot of what other schools do on purpose, by the way, is to try to make it a little bit more like, you know, well, maybe everyone can feel the pain. I gotta tell you, you know, this is where I think I heard one of my colleagues say, you know, the 8th graders really step up when we're down there. Be quite honest, it's really the only time where I plead to them the amount of work this trip really were involved in before and leading up to actually going. Last year in particular, there was a point where the class was just challenging us, and I just looked at all of them and I said, you have to understand that when it comes to putting together this trip and putting together a new school year or the first couple days of the school, the new school year, I will do that 10 times over than putting a trip like this together. This is an incredible amount of work. And honestly, that plea I have found really helps when it comes to the compassion in the patients of not just the 8th graders, but some of you as well, in terms of just reaching out to us and being proactive with us. And I need to restate what I said earlier in this evening. You know, if you have concerns about a peer or you believe your child should definitely be in with a peer, do not tell them we're having that conversation. Don't do that to me, don't do that to us. Instead, reach out to me with those magical words. My daughter doesn't know we're talking about this. And let's just make it happen. Because that's also developmentally appropriate when they think things just come together. Things just happen to solve, you know, things solve, the problem solve on their own. And it's not someone who is there with all these puppet strings. You know, we can continue the strings, let's just have them in the dark stages of the wings and such. Other questions from in person before we look to email? Yes.
If the kids fundraise and either individually or as a group and the price point goes down, at what point does that change on this website so they can show our invoices less?
Yeah, so there are payments that, you know, in years past, it's funny, when you're going through the list of all the things that were included, you know, I remember 20 years ago where parents were like, oh, wow, that's nice. That's great. That's wonderful. Didn't expect that. Now the response is very different. It's better, it's better, it's better. But the other thing is, I remember this trip just being one lump sum. The last payment is due in March, and that's where we're looking to conclude all 8th graders fundraising for their own trip. Again, there's 2 types of fundraisers that we're looking to do. There are community fundraisers where all that money is going to funnel into a big scholarship fund, where the families who are in need of assistance, we will be drawing from that fund. And then there's the individual individual fundraiser that even if your family is comfortable in affording this, we still want your 8th grader to go through the real life experience of raising money for their own trip. So we're hopeful that that fundraiser where the 8th grader is raising money for their own trip concludes around that time that the last payment is due, which is sometime in March. Other questions for in person? Yes.
Yeah, hi, my daughter has celiac disease, so what kind of special accommodations would you do?
Yep, so that is through our nurse, and we connect with Capital Tours. And there are many different ways that we can accommodate. You know, it's actually something that I'd say 10, 12 years ago, we were kind of like scratching our heads on things like that. But now it's very common. And the industries are getting much better. You know, I went into a Grill 110 just this weekend with my family, and that was the first question they asked, you know, is what type of allergies does your family have? We have all these accommodations and these different menus. We seek out the food courts and the restaurants that have. Other questions for in person? Yes.
So my son takes medication every morning and then in the afternoon. Would that be something that I would just give to the nurse ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the question was medication, and you know, what does a parent or family do? They connect with our nurse. They get a sense of, you know, 48 hours. Actually, probably be Thursday or Friday of the week before, June 3rd, where you're going to be connecting with our nurse and handing our nurse the amount of meds that your child will need down there. I will say too, our nurse is the one that dispenses all the medication. It's not a system in place where any of us are asked to handle any of those meds. We're not licensed to, don't. So it's a little bit more thoughtful in the area of, again, there's usually a long line of kids getting anything from allergy medicine to over the counter, because you're going to hear this from us at a mandatory meeting that we're gonna do with all parents sometime in May. Your child is carrying no medication on them, no over-the-counter medication, no medication they're prescribed. So there's like a long line, and it's a little bit more, even though it's a long line, that seems to be, you know, kind of showing itself to the public. It's a little better than me having 10 students and saying, oh, wait a minute, taking out of my pocket, here, Jack, here, you know, so it's a little bit more thoughtful now. Did that answer your question? Very good. Yes.
Budgeting as well. Is there time for shopping? Does $50 get you like what you don't want to eat, but 20 gets you what you like? I'm just curious kind of what you suggest for the kids to like put in pocket money.
Yeah, first of all, we will say, do your best, if you haven't already, this is the world we live in, to get your child synced in a cashless way to buy things like souvenirs, and snacks and things like that, you know, whatever we give them in cash, you're right in assuming that if they buy a meal for $8.99, they can use the rest of it for a small souvenir or something like that. The less cash they have on them, the better. And this is, again, the society that we're also living in, where, again, I went to a Bruins game a couple of weeks ago and couldn't even give them cash. So do your best, either through an Apple Watch or through a phone, that as much as you hear from me or have heard from me the last 3 years, do your best not to give them a phone. We're ready for them to have a phone by June of 2024. And if you can find a way for them to purchase things on their phone through like Apple Pay or something like that, that's the best way for them to go down. Quite honestly, it's not an area of concern we have as theft or anything like that. The number of students who lose money, you know, is rather high every year. It's a little bit less because I think they're finding ways in a cashless society to purchase things. Are we ready for questions on email? Great, there you go. My child is not on any sort of prescribed medication, but they have allergies, inhalers. What is the best way to move forward? So the best way to move forward is to always connect with our nurse. The only thing we allow for children to self-carry is actually an inhaler, and EpiPen if they need to. Other than that, any other medication, even if it's just Tylenol, or Advil, you have to give that over to our nurse. It's very important. Nothing to do with DC, nothing to do with DC. Any grades we do today?
Oh, yeah.
Assuming all these teachers are ignoring. If my child does not have a cell phone, how will they get information for the trip? Okay, so this was at 6:34, so the parent who emailed me didn't hear me 3 minutes ago say, you know, I get it, and thank you times 1,000. If you were really holding on to the fact that your child doesn't have a cell phone, a device like an Apple Watch or a smart watch could allow them to stay tethered electronically to us. We're sending you an abundance amount, I will send you an abundance amount of communication and updates about the trip, and we send the same update to the students. More so, of course, to the students, right? Because even our best plans of, you know, kind of coming back together after, say, the Holocaust Museum at 3:30, maybe the museum says to us, we'll reach capacity, we need to get your group, Mr. Cameron, out by 3. Then I send a message to all 8th graders, we have a new time that we're gathering, and that time is at 3 o'clock. That level of detail and information won't come to you. Yours will be a little bit more global in nature. I always chuckle though when I send you text messages about, you know, a good opportunity we just had, a wonderful experience we had. Sometimes some of you respond to me, thanks, sweetheart, great to hear from you, we love you. It's like, no, this is Mr. Cameron, actually. And thanks for reminding me that your child probably not in great communication, because that sometimes happens as well. Sadly, you may have already experienced that, right? Where they are, or you think they're tethered to you through a device like this, And all of a sudden it's like, hello, will you respond to me? Is everything okay? How did students choose their roommates? So again, I discussed that earlier. It's with the Google form that we don't make available to the students about a month before they go. They learn about a week before they go what room they're in. We've done it every which way, and basically it's a list of bad ways to do it, and we choose the best bad way to do it. Because there's no winning when it comes to that. I would say the worst that we've ever done it was telling kids on their way down. We're not doing that ever again. Thanks for the Zoom. Yep, so another roommate question, which I hope I have answered. And this email is also speaking a little bit about, well, actually just offering feedback about how our idea this year, unique to this year, by the way, is that every eighth grader will be fundraising for their own trip. So this mom wanted to just offer kind of a pat on the back on that. So this parent is asking whether or not train travel was considered. Yes, it was. It was considered last year. We briefly looked at it this year. To be honest, I didn't go as deep this year as I did last year because Wayland tried to do everything they could before they canceled the trip to make it a train trip. It works for really smaller schools, not a school our size. You know, this would be actually a great suggestion or recommendation for maybe Carlisle Middle School. Is this a social trip or an educational trip? I don't know if that's a loaded question or not. It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. I gotta tell you though, the old cliche in education, right, is they're not gonna remember what we teach them. They're gonna remember how they felt. And this is the best experience when it comes to that. You know, I get goosebumps on the Cherry Blossom cruise where the students were all just kind of coming together and the energy in that room on the dance floor was amazing. You know, and again, I think too, right, the further we get away from COVID, the less those moments really matter. I remember going to my first live concert after COVID, the first live sporting event, and you just felt the energy of the people that you were around. And that's how we felt with a lot of the opportunities of this past eighth grade, or now ninth grade, who went for the first time in about 3 years. So my answer is it's a little bit of both, but I have to be honest, the memories that they make, they're going to be carrying with them for the rest of their life. And, you know, testament to this is just go to any high school yearbook that asks the students, they dedicate maybe 3 or 4 pages about a memory they have, you know, through their 12 years in public school. This trip is often mentioned 3 or 4 times on every page. There's our agenda for tomorrow. Nope. Roommates. Is there enough food for a student who eats twice the amount that a normal human consumes on a daily basis? What if this mom wants me to cite her name or something? We have a ton of snacks. We carry a ton of snacks, bottled water on the buses. Believe me, we don't want your child hangry. You know what that means? You have teenagers, I hope you do. Even toddlers, right? They return back and circle back to you. Angry, of course, is they're angry because they're so hungry. We want to make sure that we're feeding them and they are getting as much nourishment as they need, because especially those students who get tired or exhausted because of all the walking that we're doing, we need to keep them fueled and keep them going. So when it comes to students who need extra meals or a bunch of snacks, the water, all of that, we are outfitted with. The second meal, things like that, that is something that you would want to cue us to do. Something we can't offer to the 200, of course, but we certainly can make sure that if a normal sized Chipotle meal that they would get for $15, if that's not enough, just share that with us before heading down. I think this question is a little bit about a scholarship need that is more than 50%. And just looking for advice from me. So I'll just repeat what I said a little bit earlier. If you believe that you might need more than 50% of the trip covered, then you probably want to send that in an email to me and allow me to register your 8th grader. That is the best way to do it. Therefore, you don't need to even come up with a $50 deposit. And the first payment that is due is going to sneak up on all of you shortly after we return from this December winter recess. I think it's around like January 8th or something like that. So right around the time that you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do this holiday season? Look at these credit card bills. You're going to be given from Capital Tours, if you register yourself, a first payment is due by, and that first payment is around $400. So that's all of a sudden around a month from now, or a little bit more than a month. So we want to think about the $50 that's due by this Friday, but you also want to think potentially about the first payment in early June. And if both, January, excuse me, if both payments are just putting a pressure upon you, your shoulders, your family, again, without your child ever knowing, reach out to me, we will register them. And you will not be at all communicated to by Capital Tours about where's the 50, where's the first payment. We will just do all of that for you. Hi, Jason. Actually, it's Justin. Our daughter is plant-based and cannot eat any of the food offered at the school. That's another problem. What plant-based meal options are available for the trip? So knowing this beforehand, or even knowing this in 5th grade, knowing this beforehand is something that we can look to accommodate. Shouldn't be a problem at all, you know, in terms of making sure that when we arrive to whatever restaurant or wherever we might be eating our breakfast, our lunch, or dinner, if we know beforehand, we can have other things ready and available there. Question. Kids like allergies, yep. Whom should I talk to best navigate? So the questions to navigate allergies would probably be our nurse, probably already knows about the allergy information anyways. And then, you know, she can talk to you a little bit about how does that world look. In terms of the severe allergies, this parent actually has a child with a severe allergy of peanuts. We're also very thoughtful about, you know, where they're placed on a bus. And making sure that all of the students, without outing that student, right, that this is a peanut-free environment. This buses, there's no snacks on this bus. I believe the airline industry has pretty much gone there as well. I believe Southwest was holding on there, but I think they've come to good senses. Parent asked if there are any parent chaperones. Actually, I forgot to cite, it's not just cost. I think Wayland is also struggling in the area of, they felt fundamentally, as we feel, that, you know, it's school-based staff that goes down. And sadly, Wayland just didn't have as many school-based staff as they needed. We're in good space when it comes to that. We're very fortunate. And so the answer to the question is we don't need parent chaperones. And quite honestly, a lot of 8th grade or middle schools will say we're going to do our best to make sure that this is a kind of a staff student trip. Your parent chaperones is a little bit more of, you know, that teacher's classroom, 6th grade, 5th grade type of experience. If they're not on medication, but have allergies, so again, talk to the nurse. That might be it. Nope, one more. How do students prepare and then process heavy things they will experience in the museums? Ooh, great question. So there are a ton of pre-teaching that we do. We just want to be very thoughtful about how much we do in person when we get a sense of the students who aren't going on the trip. And that way, We're very thoughtful in our English classes, our social studies classrooms, how many times do we gather the students in this space during the school day? We don't want to ever exclude the students who might not be going on this trip. So a lot of the themes, a lot of the things that the students will experience in museums and down in DC are talked about globally, and talked about, just about people, who might even do a virtual reality tour in that space, in that museum. And we really charge our teachers to be thoughtful, even if it's just 9 students who aren't going, 2 of them might be in your class, and every time you mention as a teacher, so when we're down there, we need to think of this, we need to think of that. One of the social skills, the social pragmatic skills that I love really thrusting upon all the students is their thoughtfulness, their decorum is a word that I often use about when they're in a space where they might turn to their left, there might be a family there at a memorial or at a museum who are in grief, and being very thoughtful to the respect they give to that space and to those people that surround them. And that gets into the area too that was asked earlier, as far as, students are really loving being with each other during this time. But when we're at certain memorials or monuments or certain museums, we need to make sure that we're forward facing to the instruction and we're forward facing to why has this space been brought together? And what meaning does it have to our country? What meaning does it have to certain groups of people? What meaning does it bring to your own life? So we do a ton of work in that area, which also works on the PBIS skill that we have for 8th graders, which is self-awareness. Trying to pop that bubble that they have around them and kind of looking around and giving an elbow to a peer and saying, you need to stop laughing so much. Take a look at this family over here who are in tears, kind of thing. So there's a ton of prep work we do, but to be quite honest, using this space for the school day, we do it in a more general way, but we do a ton of it on the buses right before we enter the space. And then we always give students who might struggle in certain museums or monuments or memorials, here are some alternative spaces that you have. If this becomes too heavy and too hard for you, we have the following staff who will be in these locations that you can decide to kind of just opt out of, maybe a self-guided tour that 8th graders are doing with their peers, or with a chaperone as well. The number one rule that you will hear from us all the time is 8th graders are never walking around doing anything by themselves. That includes everything, going to a bathroom, going for a souvenir, walking to a museum. If one of us is alone walking around, say, a museum or a monument or memorial, that's odd too, but sometimes we break away from each other just to make sure that's not happening with any of our students. Our approach, though, isn't in a place of, what are you doing? This is the number one rule. What's going on? It's first an approach of concern. Everything okay? Because sometimes it's a social reason why they have broken away from a certain group or friendships as well. If it's just like, nope, we're good. How you doing, Mr. Cameron? It's like, okay, hold on, you're alone. What's going on here? And let's walk to, we can find you a group to kind of walk around. Some of the groups, some of the museums, memorials, and monuments, though, are getting to a place where they want us to be more of that cliched field trip. I'm going to have 10 students assigned to me. And the way we used to do it is I used to walk in the 10 and be like, okay, we're going to meet back here, in about an hour and a half. There are chaperones posted at the entrance, at the exit, and the other 2 areas that they'd love to go, gift shop and cafeteria. Those are where you can find the adults. But sometimes now monuments, museums are saying, nope, you might have great trust in your 8th graders, but we don't. And that's not reflective of our groups that travel down there. Sadly, that's reflective of other groups as well. That's not the life or the autonomy or agency we give them in the airport though. In the airport, they are tethered with us and they're together with us. Quite frankly, the only time I've seen other eighth grade groups that I kind of want to jump in and say, do you know I'm a principal? Is eighth grade groups at the airport where the eighth grade of the school is allowing kids to just kind of do their own thing. That makes no sense. Because as we will say to your children, if an eighth grader is goofing around or says something or does something in the airport, they can shut down an entire trip. That is not a place that you want to make choices like that. So in the airport, we stay pretty close to the kids. Other questions here? I think the email's all set. Yes.
How is STEM for these days?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so some of them do get pretty exhausted and tired, but quite frankly, so do we. So every once in a while, we'll kind of take a read of their nonverbal and how they're doing. And if they're not able to communicate how tired they are, we'll actually make that suggestion and ask other kids who might look equally as tired or who might be there, hey, let's maybe opt out of this and just kind of lay low during this opportunity or that opportunity. So we do our best, but this is another example of if I text you a global update about, we just arrived here and we're doing this, you're gonna have me to text back to, and if your child texts you and says, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, I'm exhausted, my feet are numb, I would want you to text me so I can find your child without ever letting them know that you texted me and said, you know what, I need a couple students to help me. We're first gonna just kind of take a break, we're gonna lay low, and then we're just gonna be ahead of the bigger group before we leave. So we just really want to be thoughtful in the way that your children are communicating to you. And don't ever hesitate if your child is saying something that you might think we don't know what is going on, either with internally themselves or with the group. Does that answer your question? Most of them do okay. It's just like really real life, right? Like when my fourth grader comes home, she just like unleashes because she's so tired, she's so hungry, but she found a way to keep it together during the whole time. So when we tag and say you're it at about 7 or 8 o'clock that Friday night, good luck to all of you. You come back, we just regulated and tired. You remember that first sleepover in around the third. Any other questions here? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. Have a great evening.
Bye.